This was another one, another passage-based question. This is a newspaper article from 2012. And what's asking is, which of the following could Mr. Pena, the president of Mexico, do to increase his ability to pass legislation following the 2012 elections? So one of the things you need to be kind of heady of is, working with another branch of government. You have a separation of powers. You have checks and balances, separation of powers. In order to get anything done, you must have compromise and people working together. So one of the things that you kind of have to establish is that the two political parties must work together to establish some type of law or public policy that they can pass that both would agree to, right? Whereas, if you have, say, a parliamentary system where the executive and the legislative are one, you just have the majority party that would make the legislation, right? So make sure you kind of review how that's, indicative of what's called separation of power rather than fusion of power. One of the things that you'll see here is that this is a comparison, a country comparison type question. So this is pretty straightforward. It's 5 points. All right. So right from the get-go, make sure you always identify the task verbs, define, and then make sure to describe the method for justice selections in each country, and then explain the implications of the different judicial selections. All right. So like I said, this is a 5-point question. So I just kind of roll you through the rubric that I used. I think everybody used this one right here, that a rule of law means that everybody adheres or universally follows the law. All right. So everybody is, under a single rule that, it applies to everybody universally. You did not have to say it's established by a constitution or anything like that. That didn't affect the point whatsoever. Just had to define the rule of law. So that's probably an easy point to get. So then I'm trying to remember the countries that are all used. I think everybody used Mexico from what I remember. So Mexico, Supreme Court magistrates are nominated by the president and they're confirmed or approved by the Senate. All right. So that got you the point right there. I think one of us used China, and they mentioned that the Chinese or Communist, political party controls most judicial appointments that you have to be approved. And another one of us used Iran, that the major judiciary is appointed by the supreme leader, or if you said Khomeini, that'd be the same thing. All right. So you can see the other examples: Russia and the United Kingdom and Nigeria. Okay, were also options, but those were the ones I remember. All right, Mexico, Iran, and China. And then, so you had to pick 2 of those, and then you had to explain the implications for the different judicial selection processes on the judiciary function within each government. And so one of the things that I really was looking for, especially with Mexico, was establishment of what's called checks and balances, because the judicial branch has to be appointed by the president and then confirmed or approved by the legislative branch. So if you just said checks and balances, that was a good job. All right. So I think both of us put that. All right. The one that said China, one of the things that I was looking for here is that really the judicial serves at the whim of the political party, because in order to get a judicial appointment, you must be approved by the party within China. So if the party doesn't like you, you're probably not going to serve on the judiciary within China. All right. So there's not truly a separation, right? That you're just kind of a function of the Communist Party. In Iran, what I was looking for here is that, you're basically accountable to the supreme leader or the Khomeini. So if you use the words supreme leader or Khomeini, it's the same thing. All right. And you had to base it off Sharia law. All right. So that's another, I guess, element you had to incorporate there. So I'm going to throw a couple of concepts at you. And again, these are kind of ambiguous, but they're very important in understanding civil society. The first one's called political efficacy. The word efficacy basically means your belief in yourself on how well you can understand what's going on, but also your ability to influence it. So there's a lot of times people will say, I don't want to vote because my vote won't matter, meaning that they have a very low political efficacy. All right. And what they don't understand is that their vote isn't just counted at a local level, but it also might be counted at state level and federal level. And so it might have a tremendous impact far beyond what they would know. So one of the things that also stems from civil society is what's called social capital, is the amount of trust between the citizens and the state, that the belief that the state's doing what's best for the citizens, and the citizens believe that they have an ability to have a say in the state and what the state does. All right. And so societies with low social capital might have more authoritarian and anti-individual governments. All right. And so societies with more social capital might be inclined towards more democracy. The other thing is that, we mentioned a couple of times, and some of you've mentioned within some of your free responses in the past, is, corruption. Did people believe that they could change the outcome of a leadership or a legislative process or whatever because of the level of corruption? So when citizens believe that there's a huge amount of corruption, it doesn't matter what they do, the corruption is always going to win. That's going to lower the willingness of the people to participate in that government and to participate in civil society. So it's all three of these: political advocacy, social capital, and transparency. As those goes up, so does civil society, because the more people believe, like, hey, I can make a change, I can cause things around me to get better and so forth because of my actions and so forth, you're more willing to participate. You might be willing to volunteer to help out. You might be willing to advocate for a social cause or environmental cause or professional cause. So all three of these are correlated. That means, as one rises, the other one rises. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to do is to take a look at, in your folder, there is a article called Citizens, Society, and State. It looks like this. So this is an excerpt of a textbook. And one of the things that I'd like you to use it for is a little bit of research. Now, if you don't want to use it, that's fine. I'm just offering it as a resource, and you can have it and you can use it anytime you want. But what I want us to do is take a look at this graphical organizer right here. And what I want you to do first is look at these first two countries, the United Kingdom and Russia. I want you, in a couple of sentences, just to put it in chat, what's the description of the civil society in the United Kingdom, and then have there been any recent protests? And then second, this will be a lot easier, I think, what's the civil society look like in Russia? And then have there been any recent protests in Russia? So let's take about 7 minutes. All right, I've got 7:56. Let's go to 8:03 and see what y'all come up with. Okay, that's fairly fast research right there, guys. I'm impressed. So Great Britain or United Kingdom, one of the most open civil societies that we're ever going to find. You can join just about anything you want. And one of the things that I'm going to put this here in chat. That's a good example of a civil society within the United Kingdom is what's called a Quango, which is a unique to the United Kingdom in terms of that stands for quasi autonomous. I don't know if I'm spelling this right. Autonomous non-governmental. So Quango is unique organization because these are basically policy advisory boards that anybody can join. And you basically just can give advice on how you think legislation be carried out or what the focus of government should be or anything like that. So that's one example of the civil society within the United Kingdom, and there's been many protests over different things in the United Kingdom, especially around the time that United Kingdom left the European Union. Both of y'all mentioned Russia, not so much, especially in the 21st century. And I mentioned to one of you that since 2000, it's either 2006 or 2009, I think it's 2006, that Putin's administration passed a law that any non-government organization has to get approval to exist, that they have to register, they have to list their membership and where their money's coming from, and who's doing what and what activities you have to be approved by the government. And obviously that puts a big damper on the formation and the maintenance of non-governmental organizations. And obviously civil society's been very much restricted. And as you've seen since the war in Ukraine has started, protests have been, happening often, but they're very muted because of the violent sort of, oppression by the government, especially since the mobilization of, I think it was 300,000 troops in the past couple of weeks. There's a lot of protests all across the country. So with that being said, let's compare two more. And let's pick, I'll tell you what, you pick two out of the other four. It doesn't matter to me. Just two that you think are interesting or that you like to learn a little bit more about, and compare the two. All right. Pick between Mexico, Nigeria, China, and Iran. Just pick two of them. I don't care which two, and describe the civil society in either one of them. Really good examples all of a sudden. Awesome. Let me just start with this one right here. So Mexico, during the dominance of the PRI, you're right. The PRI was the dominant political party, and so for most of the 20th century, they had to authorize groups and had to fall under labor and middle class businesses and so forth. But since the late 90s and going into the 21st century, there's more allowance for groups to be formed without the control of the political parties and so forth. So yeah, absolutely, great example. Nigeria is another good example, very interesting. And civil society, some, although uncommon based on divides like the cleavages, there's very few protests, but very large in scale. You're right. And a lot of them deal with economic issues, especially with oil production and the environmental damage that the oil production has caused. Iran is another good example that, there is, a little bit of civil society, but it's been extremely limited. And there have been many protests, and you can see that even today, the ongoing protest in Iran. And some of the more recent ones, there's been, I think, three big protests as a result of people complaining about rigged elections in the 21st century. The last one being in 2006, called the Green Revolution. So absolutely good stuff. Let's see if I got everything here. Yep. So good job, guys. And like I said, this was just an opportunity. I just wanted to show you that, um, graphic organizer. You can just basically copy and paste what you put there in chat into the graphic organizer if you wanted. But it's just a guided set of notes that I use in class as we go through this. And, as we talk about the different countries and use some of the different examples of protest and how these protests are bringing awareness to different issues like social injustice or economic problems or, environmental concerns or whatever. Um, they can have some type of example that they can use later on. So good job. I appreciate it. So one of the things that I want to kind of segue from this is that civil society is a product of what's called political culture. So we're going to take a look at goal number 2 here, and we'll probably take a look at the daily topic video for this here in just a minute. But I did want to kind of, describe what political culture is and so the factors that go into creating it. So we'll define it first and then explain why is it important, to study in a political science class. So let's go to the citizen society and the state PowerPoint here, and I'm on slide 13 where we left off. And one of the things that, just kind of make it larger here so we can go. So culture by itself, we're all part of. And as a matter of fact, many of us are part of multiple cultures, right? But political culture is a collection of political beliefs, values, practices, institutions that government is based on over time. That means it's passed down from one generation to the next, right? So it's basically what defines a society under a government. So political traditions like, campaigning seasons, voter registration things, or not campaigns, but nomination. I'm trying to think what they're called, primaries, excuse me, and things like that. Traditions basically solidify culture. So all cultures have traditions, and those traditions basically provide touchstones that each generation coming up, as they participate in each of these little milestones, they become part of the culture. They learn more about the culture. So these cultures vary from one country to another. So even though sometimes countries are very much similar to another, they have very different cultures. So even though there's a large number of countries that speak English, for example, they have very different cultures, right? So these cultures might differ widely, and their expectations about government and so forth really are, influential in understanding. So that's why it's critical to understand political culture. And this is sort of a life lesson that in any organization that you go into, whether it be education, business, marketing, professional world, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the culture is going to be like the stream. Like if you ever enter into a river and the current or in the stream or the river is going to be moving one way, it's going to be moving in a direction. Think of that as the culture. Now, if you move with the culture, it's going to be, pretty fast sailing, right? It's going to be smooth sailing. But if you try to go against the current in a stream or a river, it's very, very hard. So if you can think of that as a political institution, like if a government tries to put legislation or some type of policy in place that goes against the culture of the society, it's like walking against the current of a river. All right. So that's something that's very important, is that if you ever become a leader of a team or a department or, business or whatever, you want to learn its culture, because, if you put something in place like a policy that goes against the culture, you're going to be walking against that current, right? So there's a couple different political culture types that we're going to kind of fit these political cultures in. So we're going to talk about 2 categories. The first one is called consensual. And what that means is that everybody kind of agrees on the format of government and how the government does its job. Like everybody agrees, like it's part of our culture. That's how we do things. And we agree that's how it should be done. All right. And usually this is a type of government that's of the people, that the people that are currently being governed created. However, there's also the conflictual type of government. And so citizens, for whatever number of reasons, are sharply divided. There's conflict on the legitimacy of the regime. The regime might be imposed, like military takeover. It might have put a policy in place that the people don't agree with, that's contrary to what they think government should be doing, or whatever. So these are two types of political culture. Either there's a general agreement, or citizens are sharply divided on legitimacy of the regime. So this is a discussion question that I give my students, when can you think of a time political culture was conflictual in the United States? And a lot of times they'll think about like in the 1960s, where the United States was involved in the Vietnam War. You had counterculture, a lot of protest about the authenticity of government here in the United States. But also, again, very recently, in a couple of recent elections since 2020, there's been a very conflictual political culture here in the United States. So it doesn't mean like there's always going to be consensual and that's the way it's always going to be, that it can fluctuate between the two. So that's why context is very important to understand when you look at political culture, that there's times where there can be consensual culture, everybody's in agreement what's happening, and then there's other times where it can be conflictual. So this is going to basically stem towards what's called political ideologies. So we'll come back to this in just a moment. But for right now, one of the things I want us to yes, you're right. Someone mentioned Civil War, and a conflictual political culture can lead to civil war, but it's not always the outcome. But usually civil wars are product of conflictual political culture. So that's a great point. And most of the case countries that we are looking at have had at least one civil war and sometimes multiple civil wars throughout their history. And that's maybe part of their political culture, that they constantly come in conflict with each other. And that's why we look at later on in this unit, towards the end, when we start talking about some of these political and social cleavages, if they aren't adequately resolved by the political system that rules them, then those cleavages will lead to that conflictual state, right? That will possibly lead to civil war. But that's a great point. So one of the things I just want us to kind of take a small look at here, let's take a look at what political ideology is. So we talked about civil society, the ability to participate in groups that aren't controlled by government. We looked at political culture, which is basically a series of political traditions, beliefs, and values that a collective group has over time. And we looked at how that's transmitted. So now we're going to look at political ideology. And one of you said, it depends on the person to person. You're right. So this is where ideology comes in. So this is where the individual, their belief about what government is, comes in. All right. So a political ideology. Now, if you just wanted to define the word ideology, it's just a set of values that you have. All right. So everybody has ideologies. What you believe about religion, what you believe about education, what you believe about family or whatever, that is your ideology. So a political ideology is a political value that you hold. All right. Now, you just learned that one of the things that is the main influence on your political ideology is your family. All right. So one of the things we're going to look at are a couple of examples of ideologies. Okay. So one is what's called liberalism. Liberalism is an ideology that has an emphasis on individual political and economic freedom. right? So basically, it's freedom from governmental influence or control. So it's high on civil liberties, it's high on free market. Okay. So a lot of times in the United States, and I'm just using our example down here, and if it doesn't make any sense to you, that's okay. But down here, the Democratic Party is usually regarded as liberal. All right. Now you also might have communism. Okay. And what that means is it's not about individual freedom, it's about equality for all. So it means that all are equal. Now, remember, communism is both an economic, political system, but it's also an ideology. Now, you also have what's called socialism, which shares the value of equality with communism, but also has private ownership and free market principles. So it's sort of a little bit in between communism, where everybody's equal, and then liberalism, where everybody's an individual. So this is somewhere in between. But the state still has a strong role to play in economy and public benefits. Then on the other extreme, you have what's called fascism. Fascism is an idea of elitism, that there's a superior group, superior race, superior ethnic group, or whatever. So probably the best example of fascism from world history is Nazi Germany, where you had a rise of a belief in what's called Aryan superiority, that there's a racial superiority of a certain group of people, and everybody else is subservient to it. So it devalues individual freedoms. It rejects the idea of equality amongst anybody. Now, you also have religious ideologies. And again, religion plays a role in just about every government at some level. So every political system has to deal with religion and religiosity. And when you take a look at, United Kingdom, you have situations with Catholics and Protestants. You've got in Nigeria, for example, Christians in the south, Muslims in the north. Obviously, in Iran, you have Sunni Muslims. So it plays a large role in a lot of different governments. So one of the things that I use here is this little metric. Oops, let me back up a little bit. So that top left, let me back up a little bit here so we can just isolate these. So the little cross mark there, the red line going up and down, at the bottom you have low belief in equality of individuals and high belief in equality of individuals. And then the blue line on the left-hand side, you have low belief in state power. And on the right side, high belief. So as you move across towards the middle, you have US Republicans that would be regarded as conservatives, okay, that believe that there doesn't need to be a whole lot of central national power, and it should be left up to the people. Whereas Democrats, which are typically more liberal, believe that there needs to be a larger role of the federal government in dealing with issues. And you see sort of where those fit in the extremes of communism, fascism, libertarian, and anarchism. Here's another sort of metric where you have on the left communism, and on the right you have liberalism, fascism at the top, and anarchism at the bottom. So the reason why I'm presenting these in different ways is to kind of give you an idea of how they might be presented, say on a multiple choice question, on where a group, a political party, an individual might fall on their ideology. Do they believe that government should be larger and more control things? Should it be smaller and less control of things? Should the government value more equality, like keeping everybody equal, or should the government be more interested in protecting civil liberties, that everybody should have individual rights? So, those are some examples there. So let me ask you a couple questions here in chat about political ideology and see what y'all think. So hopefully you got a good definition. I'll back up. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions and you just directly reply to me in chat. And, feel free to, I'm the only person who's going to see it, and I'm not certainly going to judge you for your opinions. But, and again, if you don't feel comfortable, then just don't answer. Just say, I'm not comfortable. But it's kind of important to kind of establish your ideology and where you stand on things. So let's start with this one.